Welcome back. This is the second installment of our Wednesday night Bible study looking at Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. Last time we had Abram. It's a command from God. Remember, his name was Abram at the time. His command from God was to leave, and a promise that God would make a great nation with lots of blessings. So Abram goes with his wife Sarai, nephew Lot, and servants, and travels to Canaan, which we call the Promised Land. It is occupied, but God repeats his promise that the land will go to his offspring. I should point out that although Abram was 75 years old, he and his wife had no children. So that makes that promise a bit more incredible, that there would be any children, let alone that this promised land would go to them. Okay, so we left Abram and his entourage heading south into the Negev desert. Now last time I got a little rushed. I might have been able to squeeze it in, but I didn't include it. Remember that I asked the question, what was it? It was like, what would I do given this circumstance where God told, put it in your thoughts, God told you to make a drastic change like that and do it immediately. I encourage you to continue to think about that, but I'd like to expand it a little. It's not just leaving your home to go somewhere else, because that's something that may never happen for you or anyone you know, but maybe it's a job change. Maybe it's developing a new relationship with someone, or helping someone or a group of people, or being a part of something. You may feel a nudge to plunge into something without the details in how it will turn out. And you may be getting these promptings from God, not necessarily an audible voice. We're not even sure how Abram got his proddings, but God can speak through the desires of your heart, through circumstances, through people, through dreams. The biggest hurdle, I think, is determining that it's God's promptings and not just your own or my own. But once that's determined, then faith and trust have to kick in. They have to take over. That knowing that God is in the thick of whatever this prompting is, that it's a change in your life. Okay, enough said there. So he's heading down south, Abram and his whole entourage. Verse 10, 12:10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. So Abram, faced with the famine, decided to go to Egypt to sojourn, they call it, temporary stay, to live there for a while without plans to settle. Quick look at the map again. So he was heading down. He was in this area, heading in the Negev. Drought going on, so he heads on over to Egypt. Lots of people go to Egypt when there's trouble. That Nile River is a nice thing to have when things get dry. And you can't fault him for this. The Promised Land does not look promising, and what he does will affect his entire family. But I don't know, there's no indication Abram was operating in faith. It doesn't say he prayed to God or heard from God. Would God provided for him and his family if he stayed where he was? Remember the story of Elijah? The birds brought food. Elijah was taken care of. God took care of him. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say God did prompt him, or another thing to think about is God does give us and gave him brains to deal with circumstances. So this was just one solution, which is to go over to spend some time in Egypt, kind of postpone the plan. But what he did next, it's doubtful that it was God's advice. And we look in verse 11 through 13. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. So you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. So born out of fear, Abram comes up with a scheme. He was going to be deceptive and convince his wife to be. This is inconsistent with his character as a servant of God, I think. It showed a reliance on worldly policy more than a trust in the promise. So he not only sinned himself, considering deception a sin, but tempted Sarai to sin also. It was deceptive, I'm using that term instead of an outright lie, because it really wasn't a lie that Sarah was his sister. It was true, or it was a half-truth, a white lie. She was his sister/wife. In Genesis 20, we're going to read much later, verse 12, he says, "Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife." So he conveyed to the Egyptians only what he wanted them to know. His motive was undoubtedly based on patriarchal society laws. I find that interesting. In enemy territory, a husband could be killed for his wife, because someone wanted his wife. But if you were a brother, if Abram were known as her brother, someone wanting her would have to make marriage arrangements with him rather than killing him. So maybe Abram was thinking he'd have time to sneak away. I see where you might be thinking this whole deception, what I'm calling deception, might be justifiable. You might even think it's a good thing. You might even think it was orchestrated by God. But I have trouble with that because you don't find God in Scripture, our God, promoting lying, deception, or even white lies. Also, as we'll see in a minute, a lot of grief is caused by this decision that was made. Spoiler alert, God will intervene, though. So Abram's scheme turned against him. God's promise to him was thrown into jeopardy after saying, hey, Sarai, tell him that we're brother and sister. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that she was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, men servants and maidservants, and camels. Sarai was a very beautiful woman. So it's one thing for Adam to think Sarai was beautiful, but it turns out everybody did. And who knows? I remember reading somewhere that it might have been she was growing up. She had a lot of milk. She was fed a lot of milk. I don't know. She was very beautiful. Twist of the story came when someone wanted Sarai. It was someone who didn't have to bargain for her. It was the Pharaoh. You don't mess with the Pharaoh. The very words of Abram, remember, so that I will be treated well, that he was talking to his wife, he came back on him. Pharaoh did treat Abram well because of beautiful Sarai. We saw that list of donkeys and all kinds of things. Abram got very wealthy, but this bound Abram to an obligation he wouldn't be able to get out of. His scheme was going to end up with him losing his wife. And without Sarai, his promised blessing from God would be doomed if Sarai became part of the harem of the Pharaoh. So only God could rescue his wife so that that promise to Abram might be fulfilled. And we read that in verse 17 through 20. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister so that I took her to be my wife? And then, now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So God plagued the residents of the Egyptian palace with serious diseases. So the Egyptians were a superstitious people. A plague would be very ominous to them. It's not unlike the story much later with Moses. Plagues convinced the Pharaoh to let my people go. They were both deliverances brought on by God. But this first deliverance was necessary because of Abram's white lie, his deception. In spite of Abram's foolishness, though, God was faithful. Divine intervention alone could deliver Sarai from Pharaoh's harem unharmed, and it got them kicked out of Egypt. There's another parallel here I caught, that Pharaoh's orders for Abram to leave, take her and go, are similar to God's words in calling Abram, leave your country and go. So leave your country and go was a positive thing. Take her and go, unfortunately, was Pharaoh's words said in dishonor. I just kind of want to finish this up with a couple lessons for me, and you may have been hit with others, but a couple lessons here. Remember, Abram felt that the easiest way out of danger was to manipulate deceptively, but instead it put him in danger and jeopardized the promise. So from that I get, taking the easiest way out of danger may put you in greater danger. I think it's important to remember we as God's servants should trust Him completely and should not resort to our own plans. And finally, I think it's important, another important lesson is that good and godly people fail. Christians aren't perfect. They can fall short. Christians aren't perfect, they're only forgiven. Have you heard that phrase? Christians aren't perfect, they're only forgiven. So that's where I will leave it. That ends our second installment, and so everyone take care of themselves, and God be with you.